Hey, it's Beanie. So now that it's September, I've been really craving some cozy fall vibes, and one of my favorite hobbies to do in the fall is reading. Over the past few years, I haven't been great about reading a lot. I think my average has been like between 2 and 3 books a year for a while, so really not good. But this year, I'm doing a bit better. I'm already at 6 books for the year, and I really want to make a goal for myself to read as many books as I can this season so that I can get to a higher number by the end of the year. So I put together a list of books. I have some physical copies, and I have some books that I'm planning to download on my Kobo, but I have a list of things that I want to get through this season, and I just wanted to share that with you. So grab a cup of tea and grab a blanket if it's cold enough for that where you live, and I just want to have a cozy little chat about books. Also, just to make things simple, I always consider the fall to be September, October, November. That's not technically correct. Like, technically, fall starts at the end of September and ends at the end of December, but that just feels incorrect in my brain. So I'm counting right now as it being fall. So let's get into the TBR. So I'm just going to start by showing you the book that I'm reading now. I am reading this book, Red Rising. I have it downloaded on my Kobo. So this book is the first of a trilogy, and it's like a sci-fi dystopian novel that takes place on Mars. I decided to start reading this because Haley Pham recommended it on one of her book reviews, and she reads primarily romance books, so I thought the fact that she was recommending a sci-fi novel meant that this must be a very good book. So far I'm really liking it. So once I'm done reading the first book, I might choose to read the second and third in the series, but I don't think I'm going to do that right away. I find with long series, I often like to take breaks, otherwise I kind of get bored of the world and I get a little bit burnt out. So I think I'm gonna read this and then I'm gonna hop on to some other books instead. And I do have a trip planned at the end of September to go to Scotland for my brother's wedding. So I do have a book planned that I want to download on my Kobo for the plane ride there and back. But before the trip, after I read this, I want to squeeze in one more book, so I'm going to get one from my physical TBR. The next book I want to read is Lessons in Chemistry. So if you watch Book Talk or if you watch book reviews on YouTube, then you have for sure heard people talking about this book. It has gotten so many reviews. Every time I go into a bookstore, it's like on display. So I had to pick it up earlier in the summer, and I meant to read this as one of my summer books, but I just didn't get to it because I didn't read enough in the summer. But I feel like since so many people have talked about this, my expectations are so high, which might not be a good thing, but I just think I'm gonna like this book. And usually when I'm reading, I like to stagger all my different genres. So like if I read sci-fi, then I want to read something completely different. Like if I read a romance and then I want to read a horror and like that kind of thing. So I don't fully know what this book is about. I like to go into my books fairly blind, but I feel like it's going to be a good contrast to Red Rising. So that's why I think it'll be good to read next. So then next, like I said, I'm going to be traveling to Scotland, so I need to get a book from my Kobo to bring with me to read on the plane. I just find the Kobo so much easier to travel with because it's just lighter and it takes up less space, and I can get a couple books on here so that if I end up not liking one of them, I can switch pretty easily. And the book I've decided to download on here for my trip is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And the reason that I've been wanting to read that book is a little bit funny. Like, I know it's a really popular book and it's a very popular author, but I didn't actually know about her for a long time. But I read another book called The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I'll show you here. So I read this book a few years ago. It's by Stuart Turton, The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I read this and I loved it. It was one of my favorite books ever. It still probably is maybe my favorite book. So I kept raving about this book to people when I read it, and they kept getting confused and thinking that I meant The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I kind of thought in my head that they were related somehow, like this was a spin-off of that book, or that book was a spin-off of this book. I don't know which one came out first. And I'm pretty sure they're not related. I think it's just like a coincidence that their titles are similar, but it still made me want to read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So I went to the bookstore in the summer looking for that book, and they ended up not having it, but they had Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So I read that in the summer and I loved it. So I'm really excited to read more by that author. So I think The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is going to be a good travel book because I just find if I'm traveling, even though I'm bringing my Kobo and I can technically download as many books as I want on here, I just would prefer to have one book that's going to be really great because if I'm sitting on a plane for hours, I just want to kind of have a page turner and have something that can make the time like go by quickly, because if I'm bored of my book and I'm sitting there, it's just going to be kind of a miserable journey. So I'm like almost positive that I'm going to love that book or anything that Taylor Jenkins Reid has written. So very excited to finally read that one. I will let you know if it is at all similar to my Stuart Turton book. It's probably not, but oh well, we can hope. On that note, the next book that I want to show you is also by Stuart Turton. So this is The Devil and the Dark Water So after I read The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, for years I didn't have anything else to read by this author because that was his debut novel. So I read that, I loved it, I wanted to read more by him, and I couldn't until he came out with this book. So once he released it, I rushed to the bookstore and went to multiple places to find this, and I picked it up, and I never read it. I don't know why, I just didn't get to it, but I really want to read this in the fall because, again, I don't know anything about this book. Like I said, I like to go into books blind, so I didn't really read anything about it other than what was in the front cover. So I don't really know what this is about, but it seems like it might have some darker themes. And I don't know, I just kind of like darker books in the fall time. Like in the summer, I want like light, bubbly, like romances and stuff like that. And then in the fall, I kind of want there to be like some darker stuff. Not I don't want to be traumatized, but I want to be like creeped out, you know what I mean? So I think that this is going to be that type of a book, and I'm excited to see if Stuart Turton's writing style changed at all from the last book, because it was only his second book, but very excited. And I feel like this author, I don't hear a lot about him because I loved that other book by him so much, and whenever I talk about it, no one knows what I'm talking about, so I just want to read this and then give Stuart Turton some love because he is a really great author. So the next book of my physical TBR is this one called Shady Hollow. So if you watched my watercolor bookmarks video, this is one of the books I made a bookmark for. I just didn't have it at the time because I'm just borrowing this book from my brother. But this book is a murder mystery, and this character, this fox, her name is Vera Vixen, and she's trying to solve the murder, I believe, of Mr. Toad. So very cute, and I don't know, something about murder mysteries in the fall time just feels like they go together, especially since all the characters in this book are woodland creatures. That just feels very autumnal to me, and I'm very excited to read this in the fall. And this book is the first in the series, but I believe that all of the books are like standalone books. Like maybe the characters are the same, but the murder is different. I don't really know, but I think that you could read them standalone if you want to, which is really nice because I already kind of started this series with Red Rising, so it can be a little bit daunting to have multiple series going at a time and kind of like committing yourself to multiple books. So I'm really happy about that, and it's really not too long, so I think this is a good one to kind of pick up and read over a week. I find that it's nice to have like some bigger books and then some smaller books, and just like I like to mix it up. I don't really like to read a lot of the same thing all together. Like if I read a big book, I want to read a small book. If I read a light happy book, then I don't want to read a dark book next, and like that kind of thing. It just kind of keeps me on my toes, and I find that's been helping me to read more, is just by mixing it up and having each book being very different from the last. So this is a really good like buffer book, I would think, like between two bigger ones. I'll throw this in the mix, and I think it'll just be really nice. I'm really excited for this. So this next book also comes from Book Talk. It is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And again, if you've been on Book Talk, or if you've been watching book reviews on YouTube, or just been in a bookstore, you would see that this has been recommended like crazy, and so many people are in love with this book. So my boyfriend actually picked up this copy, and he's been reading it, and he really, really likes it too. So I think there's like zero chance that I'm not gonna like this book, so it's a very safe bet for me to read in the fall, especially like a lot of these books I don't really know what they're going to be about, so there's chances I'm not going to like them. And I just find if you ever drag yourself through a book that you don't like, you just have to have ones kind of in your back pocket that you know are going to be good, so that you don't get yourself into like a reading slump. So I'm happy to have this one on hand, and I'm excited to read it. Maybe like if I end up getting a little bit traumatized by a bad book, then I can throw this one in and like reignite my love of reading if that happens. I also just really love the cover of this book, and it's one of the only hardcover books that I have. It might be the only hardcover book that I'm showing today, which just makes it feel so special, and I like the way the pages feel. And I don't know, just like when a book like feels good and sturdy in your hands, it just makes you excited to read it for some reason, even though it's like a little bit heavy. And then the last book in my physical TBR is actually one that I started way back in January, but it's in my fall TBR because I just need to finish it. So this is The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the final and third book of his trilogy, Mistborn. I read Mistborn, I think 2 years ago, or maybe it was last year, I don't even remember, but I read Mistborn and I loved it. That was the first book of the series. The second was Well of Ascension, which I read over Christmas time, and I liked that as well, but a little bit less. But this final third book, I've just kind of been struggling to get through. And I think the issue with this series, which I'm kind of concerned is going to also be an issue with this series, Red Rising, is that I find like with trilogies that kind of have to do with like civilizations and evil leaders and rebellion, like the first book will set up the civilization and you get really interesting characters, and maybe there's some fantasy or whatever, and it's just really fast paced and fun. But then for some reason, the second and the third book just get longer and slower and way more political. So that's kind of this book. Like this third one is just really heavy into the politics and how to build up a civilization. And they kind of just got rid of a lot of the things that I liked from the first and second book, and this third book, just the themes are ones that aren't really sticking with me as well. But I still really like the series, and it's not like this is a bad book, it's just that I read part of it, lost interest, and left it for months, and the longer you read a book, you know, it's harder and harder to get back into it, so I'm like halfway through, that's where my bookmark is right now, so I really just have to pick this up and finish it so that I can finish off the series. And to be fair, this book does have 750 pages in it, which is a big book, so I basically have read a book already and I have a book left, if you think about it that way. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my main TBR. I have a separate list that I've just called extras because I don't really know how much I'm going to be able to read in this fall. Like I said, I want to read as many books as possible in the next few months, but I also have some other projects that I want to work on, so I don't know how much time I'm going to have to read. So if I get through all of these books, then I have a second list of ones that I could go to afterwards. So one of my options would be to finish the second and third book of this series, Red Rising. So those books are called Golden Star and Morning Sun. And, you know, like I said, I'm kind of concerned with the Mistborn series that I'm going to end up not liking the second and third books if they get a little bit more political and long-winded. So I'm not going to commit myself to finishing this series, especially not right away. I might just leave some gaps. But if I love this book and I really wanted to get into the second and third ones, then I might do that. And another option is there's another Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I really want to read, and it's called Daisy Jones and the Six, and I'm pretty sure there's a TV show of that book as well, if I'm not mistaken, so I think the idea of like reading the book and then watching the show could be cool. So if I end up really loving The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and I just want more by that author, then that might be another one that I might go to towards the end of this season. And then a final option, if I just really want to read a ton of books and I want to get into another series, is the Akotar series. Also one that's been recommended super heavily all over YouTube and Book Talk, but the first book is called A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I would love to pick that book up, probably on my Kobo, just because a big series like that is just going to be kind of a big thing to collect. But I think that series has like 5 books in it, but it was originally supposed to be 3, something like that. So I'm okay with committing myself to 3 books. If I decide I don't want to finish this series and I want to sink my teeth into a different series, then I think A Court of Thorns and Roses would be a really fun one to start this season. So that was my full fall TBR. It's kind of a lot to get through. Not for other people. I see people doing TBRs and they read like 20 books in 1 month, and like that could not be me. But I don't know, I just think given that I've read like 2 to 3 books a year, if I can get through like 9 or 10 in just 3 months, and that would be very impressive for me. But I do find that like the more I read, the more I want to read, and I'll start to get a little bit faster because I have kind of slowed down because I haven't been reading that much in the past few years, but I have already found that I'm reading a little bit faster and getting through books quickly, so I feel confident that I can at least get through most of these, if not all of them, this season. So that is it for my fall TBR. Please let me know what you're going to be reading this season. I'm very curious to always learn about new authors or new series that I might be interested in, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye!